Law is relatively easy with only 3 dot points, and especially if you've understood the Constitution, because the first 2 dot points are really covered within the Constitution, but we're going to go through them again now. So first of all, the structure, role and structure of the Parliament, and I want to show you an image from the Parliamentary Education Office, which has some great material and great images. And we're going to focus on the Federal Parliament, but the same structure applies to New South Wales State Parliament. In fact, all state parliaments except for Queensland, which only has 1 House of Parliament. And you'll see on the right-hand side that, or the left-hand side, those 3 things add up to equaling the Parliament of Australia. And if I was to do this, I'd reverse the order and start with the House of Representatives, simply because a piece of legislation, that's how the piece of legislation goes through the Parliament. So this is the structure of the Parliament. Keep in mind, 3 aspects, 3 groups or bodies make up the Australian Parliament, okay? That's not the government. We're not talking about the government. We're talking about the Parliament. And the 3 aspects are the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the Governor-General is the Queen's representative. Now, the roles of Parliament. There are 3 fundamental roles. It boils down to 3 things. The first is passing of legislation. And you could say that's the most important part of Parliament. And it's also definitely the case that statute law represents the bulk of our law in Australia. So, and statute law outweighs any common law. So if a court case comes up with a new law, and then the Parliament doesn't like it and legislates something that's in conflict with that court-made law, then the Parliament wins out. And that's easy to remember because our democratic structure is based on representative democracy. We elect these people to represent us, and we much sooner allow those representatives to make the law than an individual or even a group of judges, okay, in a court case. So that's the first role, is passing the legislation. The second role that the Parliament has is it's from the Parliament that we draw government ministers who head up the government departments, so the Department of Defence, the Department of Health, Education, etc. Okay, so that they head up these departments, and those departments administer the law. So you remember back in the Constitution we spoke about the separation of powers, the power to make the law. That's the Parliament, the 3 groups, right? No one of those, not one. If you take one of those groups, they cannot make the law. It requires all 3. That's the House of Representatives, Senate, the Governor-General. Second role is to identify the government and the government ministers who can come from either the House of Representatives or the Senate. And those government ministers are the heads of the government departments who administer the law. And then the third role of Parliament is like a checking system or a review system, where we have parliamentary committees who are often made up of different members of different parties, and they are set up to review certain and make recommendations on certain laws or things that are going on within the law within Australia. Okay, so they're the 3 functions or roles of Parliament. And some students get confused between the Parliament and the government, and that's easy to understand and easy to remember which is which. So we have an election coming up on on May 2022, federal election. The current government at the time of this video is headed up by a coalition government. Coalition means joining together, and there are 2 parties that come together to join together traditionally, which is the Liberal Party and the National Party. Okay, they have similar ideologies, similar values, focused very strongly on economic strength and growth. Okay, and those 2 parties form a coalition in government, and the Prime Minister is always the head of the Liberal Party. Okay, so what's about to happen, because we're only a couple of months from that election, and what will happen there is that Australia, the way the House of Representatives is elected is you take Australia, divide it up in 151 areas, and we basically are voting for somebody to represent our area. Okay, so and they're not aligned with council, not necessarily aligned with council areas. They just divided up into 151 areas. And so there are 151 members. So all of the members, current 151 members in this House of Representatives will all lose their job, or they all get dismissed. stop being members of parliament, and then they can choose to either retire or to seek re-election in the May election. And they may get in or they may not. It's a tough business, okay? So they get elected. So the 151 members of the House of Representatives get elected. Then what happens in the Senate is 50% of the members of the Senate lose their job, and they once again can either retire or seek re-election. Okay? And so we've got a situation where every election, the whole of the House of Representatives is being elected. That's 151 members, and half of the Senate's being re-elected, because the House of Representatives sit for a maximum of 3 years, while the senators sit for a maximum of 6 years. Okay? So if you become a senator, you're there for 6 years. A bit more longevity. Now the government, once the election's done, we know the numbers in the House of Representatives, Senate. The government is determined by a majority of members in the House of Representatives only. Okay? So that's just the rules. So on election night, or at least a few days after, we look at the numbers, and if the coalition has a majority of 76, has 76, which is a majority in 151, then they will form government. If Labor has 76 or more, they will form government. Okay? We can have a situation where we've got a hung parliament, because it's not uncommon for us to elect independents, Greens, etc. to the House of Representatives, other parties to the House of Representatives, and so we can find a situation where neither the coalition or Labor has the majority, and then they have to seek agreement with independents or Greens, etc., to form government. Okay, that's called a hung parliament. Either way, we get a government formed. The head of the government is the Prime Minister, so either the head of the Labor Party or the head of the Liberal Party, and they then choose their ministers, and the ministers can come from either the House of Representatives or the Senate. Okay, the minister goes to the Governor General and says, so the Prime Minister goes to the Governor General and says, "Here's my ministers, please appoint them." Officially appoint them, and the Governor General does what's called swearing them in. Okay, and they then become the head of the government departments. Okay, so that's the second role of Parliament, is to administer the law. So we can start to see that our separation of powers is not perfect, because good but not perfect, because the making of the law, because the Parliament makes the law, and the Parliament, to the extent of the government ministers, also has a significant role in administering the law. So this is the role and structure of the Parliament. So let's go on to that second dot point in the syllabus, which is the legislative power. And I just want to pull up another great image from the PEO. And it's going to be a bit hard to see this in this. Let's see if I can minimise the size of this. Okay, so here we go. If I can just move that window. All right, so that's the best I can do here. And what I might even do is do this in a second video. Okay.